May 29, 1453. Tuesday. The sun rises over a city that has existed for over 1,000 years. Its walls have held against 23 sieges. Its libraries contain knowledge that the rest of the world has forgotten. Its churches are filled with gold that would fund kingdoms. Its streets carry the footsteps of emperors, philosophers, merchants, and monks who have walked here for generations beyond counting. And today, all of it ends. In this video, I use modern AI tools to reconstruct Constantinople on the last day of the Roman Empire, allowing us to move through spaces that have not existed in their original form for nearly 6 centuries. We will walk its streets before the gates fall. We will stand inside structures that changed the course of human civilization. And we will witness, in as much detail as history allows, what it felt like to be inside the last city of Rome on the day it ceased to exist. The question that frames everything we are about to see is this: how does a civilization that survived for 1,100 years die in a single morning? To understand that, we have to start not with the battle, but with the city itself. Stand at the edge of the Bosphorus and look west. What you see rising before you is something that should not be possible. A city of 400,000 people at its height, built on a triangular peninsula where Europe and Asia reached toward each other across a narrow strip of water. To the north, the Golden Horn, a natural harbor so protected and so deep that fleets of 200 ships can anchor within it simultaneously. To the south, the Sea of Marmara, connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, making this single point of land the commercial throat of the entire known world. Whoever controls Constantinople controls the flow of silk, spice, grain, slaves, silver, and information between 2 continents. The Romans understood this when Constantine chose this location in 330 AD. He did not build a new city so much as he declared a new center of gravity for the world. And for over 1,000 years, the world organized itself around that declaration. But on this morning in May 1453, the city that greets the dawn is a shadow of what it once was. The population has collapsed from its medieval peak to somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 people. Entire neighborhoods stand empty. Orchards and fields grow inside the city walls, where dense urban blocks once stood. The empire itself, once stretching from Spain to Syria, has shrunk to little more than the city and a handful of territories in Greece. The Eastern Roman Empire, which historians would later call the Byzantine Empire, now consists almost entirely of these walls and the idea they contain. And surrounding those walls, for the past 53 days, has been an Ottoman army of somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 soldiers, commanded by a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed II. This is where we begin. The Theodosian Walls stretch for nearly 6.5 kilometers across the western land approach to the city. They are not simply walls. They are an engineering achievement so sophisticated that military architects would study them for centuries. 3 layers of defense, a broad outer moat, then a low outer wall, then the main inner wall rising nearly 12 meters high, reinforced by 96 towers spaced every 50 to 70 meters apart. When the Emperor Theodosius II built them in 413 AD, they were considered impregnable. They had proven that assessment correct through siege after siege for over 1,000 years. Imagine standing at the base of those walls on the morning of May 29th, looking up at their limestone bulk. The stone is old, patched in places, repaired with different colored mortar, where Ottoman cannonballs have struck and been filled in by exhausted defenders overnight. The smell is damp limestone and smoke. Somewhere above you, a Greek soldier who has been awake for 30 hours grips a spear and watches the darkness beyond the moat for movement. The defenders of Constantinople on this final day number approximately 7,000 men. Some are Greek citizens. Some are Venetian merchants who happened to be in port when the siege began and chose to stay and fight. A contingent of around 700 Genoese soldiers under a commander named Giovanni Giustiniani has been fighting at the walls for weeks. Justiniani himself has become perhaps the most important military figure in the defense of the city, a professional soldier whose presence has held the line at the most vulnerable sections of the wall. 7,000 men against 80,000 to 100,000. The mathematics were always impossible. Everyone inside the city knew this. The Emperor Constantine XI knew this. He had sent ambassadors to Venice, to Rome, to every Christian court in Europe, asking for ships, soldiers, money. The response had been almost nothing. A few ships, some promises. The letter from the Pope, offering theological union between the Eastern and Western churches in exchange for military help, had caused riots inside the city. Many of the Greek Orthodox population of Constantinople believed, with complete sincerity, that union with Rome was a greater threat to their souls than Ottoman conquest. There's a story, almost certainly apocryphal, but told repeatedly in historical accounts, of a Byzantine official saying he would rather see the turban of a sultan in Constantinople than the cardinal's hat of a Roman legate. Whether he said it or not, the sentiment was real. This is what makes Constantinople, in May 1453, such a specific and irreducible tragedy. It was not simply a city defeated by a stronger army. It was a civilization that had become too exhausted, too divided, and too isolated to save itself, even when it could see clearly what was coming. Move now from the walls into the city itself. The streets of Constantinople on this morning are not what you might expect from a city under siege. There's not universal panic. Life, in its strange and persistent way, continues. Bakers open their shops. Priests conduct morning services. The markets in the central districts are quiet but not empty. The city has been under siege for 53 days, and human beings adapt to siege conditions the way they adapt to everything, by continuing to do the ordinary things that make ordinary life feel possible. The urban geography of Constantinople in 1453 would surprise anyone who expected a dense medieval city. Because of the population collapse over the preceding century, the city is more like a collection of inhabited villages separated by empty space than a continuous urban fabric. Distinct neighborhoods, many of them organized by ethnicity or profession, are connected by roads that pass through fields and orchards. The Venetian quarter near the waterfront, the Genoese merchants clustered around their trading posts, the Greek neighborhoods concentrated in certain districts, the Jewish community in its own quarter, the remnants of what was once the most cosmopolitan city in the Christian world. The central spine of the city follows the ancient Roman processional route, the Messi, the Middle Street, running from the Theodosian Walls in the west to the Great Central Forum, and then continuing east toward the Imperial Palace and the Hagia Sophia. Walk this road on the morning of May 29th, and you walk through 1,100 years of history compressed into a single avenue. Column bases from the reign of Constantine. Forum arcades built by Theodosius. Churches from the 6th century. Walls patched and repatched through centuries of damage and repair. The city as a physical object is a palimpsest, each generation's construction laid over the last. The whole accumulation speaking of a continuity so long it has begun to feel permanent. That feeling of permanence is about to be destroyed. This is the Hagia Sophia. There is no point in pretending to build to it gradually, because there is no gradual approach to a building of this scale and this kind of power. You either encounter it or you do not. And when you encounter it for the first time, standing in the great open space before its western facade, the mind does something unusual. It goes quiet. The Hagia Sophia was built between 532 and 537 AD under the Emperor Justinian. When it was completed, Justinian reportedly said, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." He was not being modest. He was stating what he believed to be a fact, and the building itself makes the claim difficult to dispute. The dome rises 55 meters above the floor. Its diameter is 31 meters. When it was completed, it was the largest dome in the world, and it would remain so for nearly 1,000 years. But the raw numbers do not explain the experience of being inside it. The architects, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, achieved something that no one had accomplished before. They made a dome appear to float. 40 windows ring the base of the dome, and when sunlight enters through them, the dome seems to hover above the nave, disconnected from the walls below it, suspended by light alone. Contemporary accounts describe visitors entering the Hagia Sophia and weeping without being able to explain why. Procopius, writing in the 6th century, said that the dome appeared to be suspended from heaven by a golden chain. In 1453, the Hagia Sophia is still functioning as a Christian cathedral, though the gold and jewels that once decorated its interior have been stripped over centuries of economic decline. The mosaics still cover the walls: Christ Pantocrator staring down from the apse, the Virgin and Child in the semi-dome, the great imperial panels showing Constantine and Justinian offering the city and the church to the Mother of God. The marble floors still carry the weight of 1,000 years of liturgy. The great ambo, the pulpit, still stands in the center of the nave where patriarch after patriarch has addressed the faithful. On the night of May 28th, the night before the final assault, something happens inside the Hagia Sophia that will be recorded and retold for centuries. The Emperor Constantine XI, knowing that the next morning will almost certainly bring the end, attends a final liturgy in the great cathedral. Orthodox and Catholic, Greek and Latin, priest and soldier, all come together in the Hagia Sophia for what everyone present understands to be a farewell. The emperor receives communion. He asks forgiveness of anyone he has wronged. He weeps. The sources say that the sound of weeping filled the great dome and echoed back from the walls as if the building itself were grieving. Then he left to go to the walls. He would not survive the following morning. Move now to the harbor. The Golden Horn in May 1453 holds a fleet of ships that represents one of the most audacious military maneuvers in medieval history. The Ottoman fleet had attempted to force entry into the Golden Horn earlier in the siege and been repelled by the chain that stretched across its mouth, a massive iron barrier that had protected the harbor for centuries. A chain you cannot break can still be circumvented. Mehmed ordered his engineers to construct a road of greased logs over the hill that separated the Bosphorus from the upper end of the Golden Horn, above the chain, and hauled 70 to 80 ships overland on a single night, placing them in the protected waters of the harbor before the city's defenders woke to find an Ottoman fleet inside their defenses. Imagine the moment of that realization. The defenders on the northern walls looking out at dawn and seeing Ottoman warships where there had been empty water the night before. The logistical genius required to move that many ships over a hill in a single night. The terror of understanding that the chain, the harbor, the assumption of naval safety were no longer reliable. The harbor district of Constantinople, the area along the Golden Horn waterfront, is where much of the city's commercial life is concentrated. Warehouses, docks, markets, chandlers, rope makers, fishmongers. The smell of the Golden Horn on a spring morning is salt water and fish and tar, and then the particular smell of old rope. Gulls circle overhead. In ordinary times, this would be a loud and busy place. The sound of merchants bargaining in Greek, Italian, Arabic, Turkish, Armenian, all of the languages of trade folding into each other over the sound of water against hulls. On May 29th, it is not ordinary times. The final assault begins before dawn. Mehmed sends his first waves, troops from the provinces, Anatolian irregulars, against the walls at multiple points simultaneously. This is deliberate. He wants to exhaust the defenders before his elite troops, the Janissaries, engage. The Janissaries are the Ottoman Sultan's household troops, recruited as boys from Christian families across the empire, raised as Muslims, trained from childhood for war. They are perhaps the most disciplined and effective infantry force in the 15th century world. Mehmed holds them in reserve while the outer walls are assaulted again and again, the defenders fighting back with arrows, Greek fire, rocks, and the desperate energy of men who understand there is no relief coming. For hours, the walls hold. Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, fights at the most critical section of the wall, the area near the Romanos Gate where Ottoman cannonballs have created the largest breach. He is described in sources as a figure of extraordinary physical courage, moving between defenders, directing fire, plugging gaps in the line with his own body when necessary. And then, sometime in the early morning hours, Justiniani is wounded. The sources disagree on how serious the wound was, but they agree on what happened next. He asked the emperor's permission to withdraw from the walls to have the wound treated. Constantine reportedly refused, or pleaded with him to stay, understanding that Justiniani's presence was the thing holding the line at the most vulnerable point. Justiniani withdrew anyway. What happened in the next minutes would be debated by historians for centuries. Some say the defenders saw Justiniani leaving and broke. Some say a small postern gate, the Kirkoporta, had been left unlocked by accident, and Ottoman soldiers found it and poured through. Some say both things happened simultaneously, cause and effect becoming impossible to separate in the chaos of a failing defense. What we do know is this: the Ottoman army entered the city. The moment of breach is both the climax of the siege and the beginning of something else entirely. Because what happens when an army enters a city after a 53-day siege is not a clean military victory. It is chaos. The Ottoman soldiers who poured through the walls and the Kirkoporta in those early morning hours were moving through narrow streets in darkness, fighting defenders who knew every alley and courtyard, facing a population whose immediate response was to run toward the Hagia Sophia. There is a belief, circulating through the Christian population of Constantinople in the weeks before the final assault, that if the city falls, an angel will appear and drive the Ottoman invaders back beyond the borders of the empire. The sources record this belief without mockery, which tells us something important. The people inside Constantinople were not simply passive victims waiting for the end. They were operating within a framework of meaning that made sense of their situation. If God had sustained this city for 1100 years, perhaps God would sustain it still. If not, then what was happening was part of a plan too large for human understanding. The last emperor of Rome died on May 29, 1453, somewhere in the chaos near the Romanos Gate. Constantine XI Palaiologos removed his imperial insignia so that his body could not be immediately identified and fought as a common soldier. His body was never definitively found. Some accounts say he was killed in the street fighting. Some say he was killed on the walls. The Ottomans later produced a head they claimed was his, but the identification was never certain. He was 58 years old. He had been emperor for 4 years. 600 years of history, gone in hours. Move now through the city in the hours after the walls fall. Ottoman custom of the time permitted soldiers 3 days of plunder after a city taken by force. Mehmed, in fact, limited this to a single day, though the sources disagree on how effectively the limitation was enforced. The plundering of Constantinople on May 29th was extensive. The churches were stripped. The palaces were entered. The great library, which contained manuscripts that had been preserved through the fall of Rome in the west, the Arab conquests of Egypt, the Crusader sack of 1204, was looted and dispersed. Historians have argued for centuries about exactly how many ancient texts were lost or saved, how many manuscripts made their way to Venice or Rome or Florence in the hands of Greek refugees, how much of classical antiquity passed through Constantinople and survived to the Renaissance, and how much burned or rotted or simply disappeared. We do not know exactly. What we do know is that the fall of Constantinople accelerated the movement of Greek scholars and their manuscripts into Western Europe, and that this movement had a measurable effect on the intellectual culture of the Italian Renaissance. The destruction of Constantinople and the birth of the modern Western world are not simply connected events. They are, in ways that historians continue to debate, the same event seen from different angles. The Hagia Sophia was converted to a mosque within days of the conquest. The mosaics were not immediately destroyed. Some were covered with plaster. Others remained visible for decades. Mehmed himself entered the great cathedral on the day the city fell and reportedly knelt to pray, pressing his face to the floor. A soldier who had begun to chip at the marble floor was stopped by Mehmed personally, who said that the buildings and the land were his, but the movable plunder belonged to the army. There is something worth sitting with in that image. Mehmed II, 21 years old, standing in the Hagia Sophia on the day his army entered Constantinople, looking up at the floating dome, at the gold mosaics of Christ looking down at him, at the architecture of a civilization he has just conquered. He was, by all accounts, a man of genuine intellectual curiosity. He spoke multiple languages. He collected books. He had studied the history of Rome specifically, had read the classical authors, understood what this city meant in the long arc of human civilization. He is reported to have quoted a Persian poem as he walked through the empty imperial palace. The spider is the curtain holder in the palace of Khosrow. The owl beats the war drums in the castle of Afrasiab. Even the conqueror of Constantinople was moved by the weight of what had ended. What survives in the city today is more than most people expect, and less than history deserves. The walls of Theodosius still stand in significant sections, stretching across the western approach to the city now called Istanbul. Walk along them and the scale of the defense becomes physical, becomes something your body understands in a way that reading about it cannot quite replicate. The towers, the moat, the outer wall, all still present in large portions, patched through 15 more centuries of use and repair, but still recognizably the same structure that held for 1,000 years and fell on a Tuesday morning in May. The Hagia Sophia still stands. It has been a cathedral, a mosque, a museum, and a mosque again. The interior has changed in layers, the minarets added by Ottoman architects, the Islamic calligraphy medallions, the mihrab indicating the direction of Mecca, installed where Christian liturgy once centered the space. Some of the mosaics have been uncovered in recent decades. The floating dome is still there, still doing the same impossible thing it has done since 537 AD. Still catching light through the ring of windows and making the curve of the roof appear to hover. You can stand in the Hagia Sophia today, and if you choose to, you can place yourself in the long sequence of people who have stood in exactly that spot. Justinian, who built it. The Patriarch who crowned emperors. The Crusaders who stabled horses inside it in 1204. Constantine XI, receiving his last communion. Mehmed, looking up at the dome. The Greek refugees who left and never returned. The tourists of a dozen subsequent centuries. The building holds all of them simultaneously. That is what great architecture does. It makes time visible. The fall of Constantinople is sometimes taught as a simple ending. The last Roman emperor dies, the empire ends, the medieval period closes, the modern world begins. This is a useful simplification and a misleading one. Empires do not end on single days. Civilizations do not stop. What ended on May 29th, 1453, was a specific political continuity, a line of emperors stretching from Augustus through Constantine through 1,000 years of successors to a man who took off his crown and died in the street. What did not end was the culture, the language, the theology, the art, the philosophy, the knowledge that Constantinople had preserved and transmitted for 11 centuries. Greek scholars, carrying manuscripts, arrived in Florence and Venice and Rome. The knowledge of ancient Greek that had been nearly lost in Western Europe was reintroduced through these refugees. Plato in the original, Aristotle without the Arabic intermediary, the full texts of authors that Western scholars had known only in fragments or in translation. The Renaissance did not cause the fall of Constantinople, but the fall of Constantinople helped cause the Renaissance. The two events are entangled in ways that modern Europe has not always been eager to acknowledge.